He bought an old horse for $100 and discovered a miracle the world tried to bury forever. When Elias Morgan rescued a forgotten old horse from a cold county pen, he thought he was simply giving a worn soul one last peaceful home. But that night, as the storm rolled over the Wyoming mountains, the horse's heart revealed a secret so impossible it had nearly been erased from history. And the people who hid it were already coming for him. The wind came down from the Tetons like a long, tired sigh, pushing dry snow and dust across the gravel lot of the county livestock yard. It wasn't a real auction barn, not the kind where proud ranchers sold calves by the trailer load. This was the place where tired animals ended up when nobody knew what else to do with them. Old milk cows, lame roping horses, a few burros with burrs tangled in their manes. And today, in the middle of March, it was colder than it had any right to be. Elias Morgan stood with his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn canvas coat, collar turned up against the wind. His breath rose in soft clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The brim of his black hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but underneath that shade, he watched everything. It was a habit left over from years as a firefighter, from walking into houses where everything could go wrong in a second. You learn to see details. You learn to read the room. And today, the room was a ragged rectangle of pipe pens, rusted gates, and tired horses shifting their weight on frozen ground. The yard manager's voice droned through a crackling loudspeaker, calling out lot numbers and ages, throwing around words like sound, serviceable, gentle for kids, in the same tone someone might use to sell used trucks. Men in stained jeans raised gloved hands, made quick bids, then turned away as soon as the deal was done. Some of them were honest buyers looking for a cheap ranch horse. Some were the kind of buyers nobody talked about. Kill buyers, sending animals off by the semi-load to plants far away. The words horse slaughter never left anyone's lips, but they hung in the cold air anyway. Elias hadn't come looking for anything special. That's what he told himself on the drive over, at least. The truth was messier. The truth was that the Willow Creek Ranch felt too quiet lately, its pastures too empty, his evenings too long. Paperwork about life insurance and property taxes sat unread on his kitchen table under a coffee mug ring. His wife had once insisted they keep their policies up to date, their retirement savings in order, their health insurance never allowed to lapse. Since she died, all those sensible things felt like they belonged to another world. He told himself he was just here to see what was going cheap, maybe pick up a stray that needed a place to grow old. It sounded practical enough. It wasn't. He walked the pen slowly, boots crunching on a crust of old snow. A bay mare with a weary eye pinned her ears back when he drew too close. A sorrel gelding lifted his head, hope rising, then sank back into himself when Elias moved on. He stopped to rest a gloved hand on a dun horse's neck, feeling the bone under thin skin. Someone had cared once, had brushed these coats, had given these animals names. Somewhere along the line, life had gotten too tight. Mortgages missed, droughts too long, feed too expensive. When money gets thin, dreams go first. He was turning to go when he saw the far corner pen. It was half hidden behind a stack of bent panels and an old water tank like an afterthought. No one was standing near it, no clipboard hanging on the gate. The horse inside blended with the shadows at first, just a shape against the warped boards. Only when the wind shifted and a shaft of weak sunlight slid in did Elias see him clearly. A gray. No, not even gray, more like ash, a washed-out mix of white and charcoal, as if the color had been rubbed off by years of weather and hands and rain. The horse stood with his head low, legs braced like he was riding out a storm only he could feel. His ribs didn't show sharply, but there was an old hollowness to the way his hide lay over his frame, a tiredness that went beyond age. Elias stepped closer, fingers curling around the cold metal of the gate. The horse didn't start or snort or shy away. He simply lifted his head a fraction, enough that one dark eye could find the man on the other side of the bars. The look in that eye stopped Elias harder than any shout could have. It wasn't wild, it wasn't angry, it was finished. Not the soft peace of an animal dozing in late summer sun, but the quiet of something that had been disappointed so many times it had given up expecting anything good. There was a layer beneath that, too, if you watched long enough, a question faint as a fading heartbeat. Are you like the others? "Hey, you don't want that one," the voice came from behind him. Elias turned to see the yard manager, shoulders hunched, cheeks red from wind. The man jabbed a finger toward the pen. "He's not even on the main list. Owner dropped him here and just paid the fee to get rid of him. Old, probably got a bad heart or something. You don't need that trouble, friend." "A bad heart," Elias repeated, eyes drifting back to the gray. "You a vet now, Ray?" Ray snorted. "Don't have to be. Look at him. 20-something. Easy. Won't bring enough at the plant to pay the diesel. We'll probably just throw him in with whatever goes at the end. You looking for something rideable? I can show you a couple solid geldings. Good for ranch work. Won't break the bank." Elias didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, rattling the panels, carrying the smell of old hay and manure and something metallic underneath. The gray horse flicked one ear, more out of habit than curiosity. "How long's he been here?" Elias asked. "Couple of days, maybe 3. Why?" Ray narrowed his eyes. "You don't want that one, Morgan. Bad bargain. You know what hay costs this winter. You want to throw it at something that's just going to lay down and die on you?" Elias leaned his forearms on the gate, ignoring the cold seeping through his coat. He watched the rise and fall of the horse's ribs, slow but steady. There was a patch of rough hair along the animal's chest, where the coat grew oddly, like something beneath the skin had once been opened and sewn back together. A scar? Maybe. Hard to tell under the winter hair. His wife's voice rose in his memory, unbidden, the way she used to stay late at the clinic, making sure the quiet, half-broken dog in the last kennel got walked, or calling some stranger she'd met online about adopting a 3-legged cat. She'd once told him, half laughing, that the world was better when people were willing to be bad bargains for something that needed them. He swallowed, feeling the sting of that memory hit the back of his throat. "He got a name?" Elias asked. Ray shrugged. "Came in as gray gelding. Might not even be a gelding. Who knows? Papers? None. History? None. Just a mouth to feed." He pulled his coat tighter. "Look, I got other buyers to talk to. You want to walk the main string again? You go ahead. We'll run through the culls at the end. I'll start the bidding," Elias said quietly. Ray blinked. "On this one?" "Yeah." Elias straightened, meeting the man's doubtful stare. "On this one. You don't even know if he's halter broke." Elias glanced at the gray again. The horse's ears were forward now, just a fraction more alert, like the soft rumble of voices had reached some deep place, still listening for a chance that never came. "I don't need him to be much of anything," Elias said. "Just need him to have one more place to stand." Ray shook his head, but he pulled the small notebook from his pocket anyway, licking his thumb to flip a page. "You're the one paying the feed bill. What do you want to call him for the paperwork?" The wind paused for a heartbeat, the yard settling into a strange stillness. Elias looked at the color of the horse's coat, that washed-out gray like chimney dust after a long winter's fire. "Ash," he said. "Write him down as Ash." Ray scribbled the name with a snort. "You're a soft touch, Morgan. 10 years ago, I'd have told you to get a good lawyer. or an online degree in business. Put your money in something smart instead of sinking it into bad stock. Now I just say, it's your funeral." Elias let the teasing roll off him. He kept his gaze on the horse, on that tired eye, watching him like it couldn't quite decide if this man was real or just another passing shadow. "What's the minimum on him?" Elias asked. Ray hesitated, then shrugged. "Hell, $50, just to say he went through an actual sale." "I'll give you 100, Elias said. The manager stared at him like he'd misheard. "You know you're bidding against yourself, right?" "Then it should be an easy win," Elias answered, voice flat but not unkind. For the first time, something like surprise flickered in the Gray's gaze, a tiny crack in the wall of resignation. Elias didn't imagine it. He knew better than to put human thoughts into an animal's head. But he did believe in weight. How kindness has a weight in the world, just like cruelty does. Ray shook his head, scribbled the amount, and snapped the notebook shut. "Fine. He's yours, Morgan. We'll get the slip printed. You got a trailer?" Elias nodded once. Ray started to walk away, then paused. "You sure about this?" Elias didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the horse, on the way the animal's ears tilted slightly forward, as if trying to catch an answer on the wind. "Yeah," Elias said softly. "I'm sure." The gray horse exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that hung in the cold air between them. Elias rested his fingers lightly against the gate and spoke to him for the first time, his voice low, almost awkward, as if he was out of practice at talking to anything that listened. "Come on, old boy," he murmured. "Let's get you home." The trailer rattled like an old tin can as Elias eased his truck onto the county road, the gray horse standing in the dim interior with a stillness that made Elias check the rearview mirror far more than necessary. The late winter sky hung low over the Tetons, soft clouds dragging their shadows across slopes still packed with snow. The world looked half asleep, caught somewhere between thaw and freeze, winter and spring, past and future. The sort of in-between place Elias understood all too well. Ash didn't move. Not when the truck dipped into the shallow wash near the cottonwoods, not when the wind shoved hard against the side of the trailer. A younger horse might have staggered or pawed in panic, but Ash stood rooted as if bracing for something he'd learned long ago. Stay still, survive longer. Every bump in the road made Elias tighten his grip on the wheel. He kept imagining the sound of a body falling, the dull thud of an animal going down. But each glance in the mirror showed that same shape, narrow, fragile, motionless, swaying gently to keep balance. The road curved along Willow Creek, its surface wet from melting snow. Water glimmered between the reeds like threads of silver, flowing toward the valley where Elias's ranch waited, half hidden behind winter bare aspens. He'd built that place with his wife, put up fences, repaired roofing, planted hardy shrubs the deer inevitably destroyed. And after she died, the ranch had grown quieter each year, the spaces between chores stretching out like long shadows at dusk. Now, for the first time in months, he wasn't going home alone. When he pulled into the driveway, gravel popped under his tires. The house, 2 stories of weathered pine, sat with its shutters closed against the cold. The barn behind it was older but sturdy, its tin roof clattering softly in the wind. Elias shut off the truck and stepped out into the sharp air, bracing as the cold bit into his lungs. For a moment he just stood there, staring at the barn, listening to the steady hum of Willow Creek beyond the pasture. Then he walked to the trailer. The moment he swung open the back door, Ash lifted his head. Not much, just enough so his eyes met Elias's in the faint light. Up close, those eyes were darker than he'd realized, almost black with flecks of brown. They weren't empty like he'd first thought. They were watching, measuring quietly, like a creature that had been wrong too many times but wasn't ready to bolt. "It's all right," Elias murmured, his breath puffing pale in the cold. "Easy, old boy. You're home now." He stepped inside the trailer. The air smelled of dust and old hay. Ash shifted his weight, hooves scraping gently on the rubber mat. Elias clipped a lead rope to the loose halter the yard manager had thrown on earlier. The buckle was rusted, the rope frayed. Ash didn't flinch when Elias tugged lightly. "One step," Elias whispered. "That's all." Ash hesitated. His ears flicked toward the open doorway, toward the cold light spilling through. Then he took one step, then another, slow, deliberate. By the time his hooves touched the dirt of the driveway, Elias felt his throat tighten with something he didn't want to name, something dangerously close to relief. The wind caught Ash's mane, lifting the strands like smoke from a dying fire. The moment felt fragile, like something might shatter if either of them moved too quickly. Inside the barn, Elias guided him into the first stall on the left, the warmest one, shielded from drafts. He'd bedded it with fresh straw that morning, telling himself it was for a future foal or maybe a new roping horse, not daring to admit he'd already felt pulled toward that forgotten gray in the corner pen long before he saw him. Ash stepped inside, lowered his head, and stood as if he were waiting for someone's permission just to exist. Elias filled a bucket with warm water and slid it into the stall. Then he grabbed a flake of hay, good Timothy, fragrant and soft, and placed it in front of the horse. Ash didn't dive into it like an animal starved. He lowered his head slowly and took one cautious mouthful, chewing like he wasn't sure if the food would stay or be taken away. "You can take your time," Elias said. He rested both hands on the top rail, watching the horse drink. "Nobody's rushing you." A light snow began to fall, the flakes drifting through the cracks in the barn roof like cold feathers. They landed on Ash's coat without melting, clinging to the faded gray until he shimmered faintly in the dim light, the way ash from a burned log sometimes catches the last glow of embers. Elias could not look away. He found a brush and approached slowly, letting Ash smell his hand first. The horse twitched, but didn't move back. Elias began brushing the tangled mane, careful around the rough patch on the chest where the hair grew in a strange swirl, almost like a scar hidden under winter coat. When the brush passed near it, Ash tightened his muscles, but only for a second. "That's it," Elias whispered. "You're all right." The barn lights hummed overhead. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the tin roof like distant thunder. Elias brushed Ash's neck and shoulders until the coat beneath his hands felt warmer, almost alive again. The movements were slow, methodical, like brushing away years of neglect grain by grain. "You and me," he murmured, "we're both too quiet for our own good." Ash blinked, long and slow. Elias stepped back and leaned against the stall door, letting the quiet surround them. Something in the barn felt different now, less Mallow, less forgotten. He didn't know what tomorrow held, didn't know if he'd just brought home a responsibility he wasn't ready for. But he knew one thing: Ash wasn't a mistake, not a burden, not a bad bargain. Just a horse with a story no one had cared enough to hear. Yet. Elias latched the stall door gently and turned toward the barn entrance. Behind him, Ash shifted, the soft rustle of straw the only sound. As Elias stepped outside, the barn light spilled behind him, casting a long shadow across the snow. For the first time in a long while, the ranch didn't feel empty, and somewhere deep in the barn, Ash exhaled, a slow, steady breath that sounded almost like the beginning of trust. Morning crept over Willow Creek Ranch in pale gold, brushing the frost on the fence rails and warming the barn roof just enough to make it crackle softly. Elias stepped into the chill air with a steaming mug of coffee in hand, boots crunching over the ground still frozen from the night. The kind of cold that seeped into old wood and older bones, but today For the first time in months, he didn't feel entirely hollow stepping out his front door. There was a presence waiting in the barn, a reason to move with purpose instead of habit. Ash lifted his head when Elias entered, ears flicking forward. The barn was quiet except for the light snuffle of warm breath rising in faint clouds. Elias leaned against the stall door, watching the old horse for a moment. How he stood a little more evenly this morning, how the heaviness in his eyes seemed less like surrender and more like caution. It was enough to make something settle in Elias's chest, a small anchor against the drifting sense of loss he'd been living with too long. "You made it through the night," he murmured. "Guess we're off to a good start." He checked Ash's water, replaced it with fresh warm buckets, then reached for the brush again. The horse flinched less today, accepting the strokes with a quiet patience that felt fragile, like trust trying to sprout in frozen ground. As Elias brushed along Ash's shoulder, his fingers passed over that rough patch again, the one he'd noticed yesterday but hadn't thought too much about. Only now, with daylight pouring through the slats in the barn wall, he saw it clearly. Not a patch of tangled coat, not an old injury from barbed wire or a kick, but a long, clean line, too straight, too deliberate, too precise to be an accident. The kind of mark only a scalpel could leave. Elias paused, heart tightening. He brushed the hair back gently, revealing more details beneath the winter coat. The faint ridge of sutures long-healed, tissue grown thick and slightly raised. A surgical scar. On a horse that supposedly had no value, no records, no past. "Huh," he breathed, lowering his mug to get a better look. "What happened to you, old boy?" Ash shifted uneasily, not from pain but from memory. His muscles twitched beneath Elias's hand as if some part of him recognized being examined, not by a rancher with a soft voice, but by someone in a sterile room with lights too bright and hands too cold. Elias's brow furrowed. Horses didn't get surgical scars like this unless the surgery was big, expensive, and necessary to save a valuable animal. But Ash had been dumped like trash at the county yard, given no papers, no name, no history. Nothing about the horse in front of him made sense. A distant truck rumbled up the gravel road, pulling Elias from his thoughts. He wiped his hand on his sleeve and stepped out to see who was coming. Dr. June Wallace climbed out of her old green Subaru, her vet bag slung over her shoulder and her short hair tucked under a knit cap. She waved with a tired smile. "Morning, Elias. You said you brought home a new one yesterday?" "Yeah, though I'm starting to wonder if I should have brought home a puzzle instead." Elias gestured toward the barn. "Come take a look." Inside, June knelt beside Ash with the ease of someone who'd worked around animals her whole life. Ash eyed her warily, but stayed still as she lifted his front leg, checked his joints, ran her fingers along his spine. Then she reached the scar. She froze. Her hand hovered over the line of healed tissue, eyes narrowing. "This isn't just a scar," she whispered. "Elias, this looks like thoracic surgery." Elias blinked. "On a horse?" June nodded slowly. "A very rare kind. This incision angle, this depth. You don't do something like this unless you're operating on the heart, or something near it." Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine, colder than the wind outside. He was dropped at the yard like he wasn't worth the gas to get there. "I know," June's voice softened, "which makes this even stranger." She pulled a small penlight from her bag and checked Ash's eyes, then lifted his lip to look at his gums. Her brow furrowed deeper with each detail she examined. Old wear on the teeth, but not as much as she expected. Muscle tone inconsistent with his age. An odd rhythm in his breathing that made her check her stethoscope twice. "This horse doesn't match himself," she said. "It's like pieces of him tell different stories." "Someone cut him open," Elias said quietly, "and then someone else threw him away." June didn't deny it. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening. Her expression changed. Shock first, then confusion, then something like fear tinged with awe. "What?" Elias asked. June lifted her head slowly. "His heartbeat has a hitch. Not a dangerous one, just different, like the rhythm of reconstructed tissue." Elias stared at her. "Reconstructed? Regrown, maybe. I don't know yet." June pulled back, rubbing her hands together to warm them. "This scar is too clean to be amateur work. Whoever operated on him knew exactly what they were doing. And whatever they did, it wasn't standard veterinary medicine." Ash shifted, bumping his muzzle gently against the stall rail. Elias reached out and stroked his face. The old horse leaned into the touch more than yesterday, letting his weight settle in a way that told Elias he wasn't afraid of him anymore. "He came with nothing," Elias said. "No papers, no name, but he's got a scar worth more than anything I've ever owned." June stood, brushing straw from her knees. "I want to run some tests, blood work, maybe imaging if we can manage it. I want to know what was done to him." "Do you think someone's still looking for him?" Elias asked. June hesitated. "If they went through the trouble of doing this surgery, then yes. Someone cared enough to save him, or needed something from him." Elias's jaw tightened. He rested his hand on Ash's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the skin. "Well, he's here now, and whoever had him before, they didn't treat him like something worth keeping." June packed her tools back into her bag, then glanced at Elias with a thoughtful, almost cautious expression. "Just keep an eye out. Animals like this, they don't just disappear. Someone lost him, or someone hid him." Elias didn't answer. He watched Ash lower his head to the hay, chewing slowly, like he was trying to remember what comfort tasted like. Outside, the wind tugged at the barn's rafters, rattling the tin as if the whole valley was whispering warnings he wasn't ready to understand. But one thing felt certain in the quiet morning light. This horse had a past, and whatever it wasn't done with him yet. The sky over Willow Creek turned a washed-out silver by late afternoon, the kind of light that made the whole valley look like an old photograph. Elias drove with one hand on the wheel and the other tapping absently against his thigh, the truck heater humming as it pushed warm air into the cab. Ash's scar, June's unsettled expression, her quiet words echoing in the barn. This wasn't standard veterinary medicine. None of it had left his mind since she'd driven away that morning. He wasn't a man given to chasing mysteries. Life had taught him that the world was complicated enough without looking for trouble. But as he followed the narrow county road toward Jackson, past ranch fences half buried in dirty snow and cottonwoods just beginning to bud, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ash hadn't ended up in that livestock yard by accident. Something had happened to the old horse, something too deliberate, too expensive, too purposeful for him to ignore. He turned onto a side street near the small university satellite campus, a cluster of low buildings that always looked sleepy compared to the bustle of Jackson proper. June had told him where to go, the Veterinary Sciences Wing, a place where Dr. Miriam Hale, brilliant, compassionate, deeply private, had once spent long evenings long after her colleagues went home. Elias pushed open the glass door, stepping into a warm lobby that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. A receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" He removed his hat politely. "I'm trying to find information on Dr. Miriam Hale. I heard she worked here before she went missing." The woman's eyebrows lifted slightly at the name. "Miriam?" "Yes, she taught cardiothoracic physiology here. Brilliant woman. It's been a few years." She studied Elias with a curiosity he'd grown used to, strangers noticing the grief etched in his posture, the ruggedness that marked ranch work. "Are you family?" "No," Elias said, "just trying to understand something about a horse she might have treated." Her expression changed, softened, but also tightened with concern. "I'll get someone who knew her well." Moments later, Elias found himself walking down a quiet hallway alongside an older professor named Dr. Leland Frost. The man wore a tweed jacket despite the season and carried the faint scent of cedar and old books. "Miriam was one of my brightest," Dr. Frost said. "Dedicated, fierce about doing the right thing. But her disappearance, that was hard on all of us." They entered a small office with stacks of research papers tilting dangerously on every surface. Frost motioned for Elias to sit, then retrieved a dusty folder from a filing cabinet. "You said you're asking about a horse?" "A gray," Elias replied. "Old, surgical scar across the chest." At that, Frost paused with the folder halfway open. "That scar," he murmured, "the thoracic incision. That sounds like one of hers." Elias leaned forward slightly. "One of hers?" Frost exhaled, settling behind his desk. Miriam was part of a private research initiative, very quiet, very specialized. She believed heart regeneration in large mammals was possible. Not just treating cardiomyopathy, mind you, true regeneration. Breakthrough that could change everything from pet care to human medicine. And she tested it on horses? "Not horses," Frost corrected gently. "A horse." He tapped the folder. "One. The only one that survived a specific experimental procedure. She never disclosed the full details, said she was protecting the animal." Elias felt his heartbeat thud once, hard. "Did she say where that horse went?" Frost shook his head. "One day she was here, gathering research logs. The next, she didn't show up. Authorities found her car abandoned near a forest road. No signs of struggle, no notes. It became a cold case within months." Elias swallowed, the weight of his next question settling heavily. "Did she have any reason to hide the horse?" Frost hesitated. Miriam believed the corporate sponsor funding her work had started pushing for results too aggressively. She mentioned ethical concerns, said she wouldn't let her research become someone else's weapon. A few weeks before she vanished, she told me she was afraid someone would try to seize her test subject. A chill crept over Elias's spine. Outside the office window, the wind stirred the branches, tapping them softly against the glass, like fingers searching for a way in. "Dr. Frost," he said slowly, "if someone wanted that horse gone, or silenced, who would it be?" The professor closed the folder, set it down carefully, and folded his hands together. "That depends," he said, "on who funded Miriam's research after the university cut ties. But I will tell you this, she didn't trust them anymore. She believed the project had drifted into territory she never agreed to. And if they were willing to lose an asset as valuable as Miriam," he let the implication hang, "they wouldn't blink at losing the animal either." Elias imagined Ash trembling in that dark county pen, unwanted and forgotten, but not unscarred, not untouched by something monumental. Suddenly the image felt more sinister. Not abandonment, not neglect, erasure. "Do you have any of Miriam's notes?" Elias asked, voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. Frost reached into his desk and pulled out a slim stack of photocopied pages. Some had scribbles in the margins, diagrams of ventricular walls, irregular heartbeat notations, and a page that made Elias's stomach twist. A rough sketch of an incision nearly identical to the scar on Ash's chest. "She gave me these the week before she disappeared," Frost said. "Said if anything happened to her, someone should know the truth." Elias stared at the sketch, his breath heavy. "This was him," he whispered. "It has to be." Frost's gaze softened with sympathy. "If you have that horse, Mr. Morgan, you need to be very careful. Miriam risked everything to protect him. And people who pursue research like this, they don't let their assets vanish quietly. As Elias left the building, the clouds had darkened, spreading across the mountains like a closing fist. He held the folder tight against his chest as he walked back to the truck, the pages shifting in the wind like whispers of a life cut short. On the drive home, he kept glancing at the rearview mirror, an old habit, but this time not to check the trailer. There was no trailer. This time he was checking the road behind him, searching for headlights following too closely, for vehicles he didn't recognize. The world suddenly felt narrower, the valley smaller, the sky closer. A sense of being watched prickled the back of his neck. When he returned to the ranch, Ash was standing just inside the stall door, ears lifted toward him, like he'd been waiting. Elias exhaled slowly and stepped inside. "Seems you've been through more than I realized," he murmured, running a hand down the horse's neck. "And someone didn't want the world knowing it." Ash nudged him gently, the motion soft but deliberate, as if acknowledging something in Elias's voice. Fear, maybe, or resolve. Outside, the wind howled over the ridge, making the barn shudder. Elias looked toward the darkening valley beyond the door, a feeling settling over him like the first hint of a coming storm. Whatever Miriam Hale had protected, whatever she had died for, it was standing right in front of him. And he knew now, someone out there wanted Ash back. A hard wind came down from the mountains the next afternoon, rattling the barn doors and carrying the sharp scent of distant snow. Elias was stacking hay bales near the tack room when the unmistakable growl of an engine drifted up the driveway. Not the steady rumble of a ranch truck, not the sputtering of a neighbor's old Chevy. This sound was smoother, heavier, polished in a way that didn't belong anywhere near Willow Creek. Elias set the last bale down and stepped outside, brushing straw from his sleeves. A black SUV was rolling to a stop near the front porch, its tinted windows absorbing the winter light like it was swallowing it whole. The engine shut off. Silence followed, too clean, too deliberate. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She moved like a blade, precise, confident, cutting through the cold without flinching. Her coat was long and black, tailored sharp at the shoulders. Her blonde hair was clipped back neatly, revealing a face carved in angles. Sharp cheekbones, narrowed eyes, a mouth that looked as though it forgot how to smile years ago. Elias sensed trouble before she even spoke. "Mr. Morgan?" Her voice was warm in tone, but flat in temperature. Practiced. Controlled. "I'm Vivian Klein." Elias nodded, cautious. "Afternoon. Something I can help you with?" Vivian's gaze swept the ranch, past the fence line, the aspens, the barn, like she was searching for exits, weaknesses, escape routes. "You acquired a horse 2 days ago. A gray, elderly, scar on the chest." Elias felt the back of his neck stiffen. He kept his expression neutral. "I brought home an old gelding, yes. Why?" Vivian stepped closer, her heels crunching the gravel. "I represent a private research firm. We're very interested in that animal. He was part of a therapeutic study we believed concluded years ago. Somehow, he ended up misplaced." She said the word misplaced the way someone else might say compromised. "I'd like to buy him from you," she continued, "for a price that reflects his importance." Elias crossed his arms. "What kind of price are we talking?" Vivian reached into her coat and pulled out a slim envelope. She held it between 2 fingers, extending it toward him. $5,000, cash. The number wasn't small, not for an old horse with no use other than company. But the offer came too quickly, too cleanly, and with no hesitation, as though the money didn't matter, as though the horse did. Elias didn't take the envelope. "Why is this horse important to you?" he asked. Vivian lowered her hand. "That's proprietary information. Not good enough, Elias said. If you want him, you tell me why. Her jaw tightened the tiniest fraction. Irritation. Or warning. Mr. Morgan, we don't want trouble, she said calmly. We simply want to retrieve an asset that should never have left our custody. The surgery performed on that horse required millions in research funding. His condition is unique, extraordinary. We can ensure he receives proper handling and medical care. That's not something a rancher can provide. Elias felt the urge to step back, not from fear, but from anger rising hot in his chest. I'm providing him care just fine. Are you? She glanced toward the barn door as if she could see through it. An animal like that, he requires protocols, monitoring, containment. Containment, Elias repeated, his voice sharpening. He's not a hazard. Vivian's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time he saw something behind the calm, something cold, watchful, assessing. Every organism can be a hazard if the wrong people get their hands on it. And if the right people do? Elias asked quietly. Vivian didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. Mr. Morgan, let's not create a situation here. You won that horse in a county pen. You paid almost nothing for him. I'm offering far more than he's worth. You'd walk away richer, and we'd walk away with what belongs to us. Elias shook his head. He doesn't belong to anybody but himself. Vivian's polite mask cracked for one beat, just one, enough to reveal steel underneath. I advise you to reconsider, she said. I'm not selling, Elias replied. Vivian inhaled slowly, as if steadying herself. Then she tucked the envelope back into her coat. I thought you might say that. The passenger door opened, and a man stepped out, large, broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of suit that couldn't quite hide a body built for physical work. His stance was alert, his eyes scanning the property like a guard dog assessing a perimeter. Vivian didn't introduce him. Mr. Morgan, she said, the horse represents sensitive research data. If the company learns you're obstructing retrieval, they may pursue legal channels, or other channels. Elias felt his grip tighten on the strap of his glove. Is that supposed to scare me? It's supposed to educate you. Vivian's voice softened, though nothing warm entered it. You're a man alone out here. No staff, no family, no witnesses. Please understand what isolation can mean. The words drifted into the cold air, not shouted, not threatened, stated. That made them worse. Elias didn't move, didn't step back or forward. He kept his breathing even. You should go. Vivian studied him for several long seconds, those pale eyes reading him, measuring him the way she'd measured his ranch earlier. Then she nodded once, a polite gesture with the weight of a closing door. We'll be in touch, she said. As she turned, she paused by his mailbox, tapping it lightly with a gloved finger. Isolation is unpredictable. I'd hate for something unfortunate to happen. Then she walked back to the SUV, heels silent now on the gravel. The large man followed, giving Elias a final flat look before climbing inside. The engine started. The vehicle backed up slowly, then began rolling down the driveway. Elias stood in the wind until the taillights disappeared around the bend. Only then did he release the breath he'd been holding. He returned to the barn. Ash lifted his head immediately, ears sharp, eyes following him like he sensed something had changed. Elias leaned against the stall rail, letting the familiar smell of hay and old wood steady him. She's not getting you, he whispered. Ash pressed his muzzle to the rail, soft, warm, alive. Elias laid a hand on the horse's face, his voice barely more than breath. No matter who she sends next. Outside, the valley grew quiet again, but the silence felt different this time. Not empty. Waiting. The temperature dropped long before the sun went down, the cold settling over Willow Creek like a thick, invisible blanket. By the time evening arrived, frost had already crept across the fence rails, shimmering faintly under the glow of the barn lights. Elias finished evening chores without hurry, though his thoughts kept circling back to the black SUV and the woman with eyes like polished ice. Her words hadn't just lingered, they'd rooted. Isolation is unpredictable. He hated that the phrase still echoed in his mind. Inside the barn, Ash stood quietly in his stall, head lowered as if conserving energy. Elias checked his water, added a bit more hay, and brushed what little dust clung to the horse's coat. Ash accepted each touch, his breathing slow and steady. The old horse seemed calmer tonight, though Elias suspected it wasn't true calm, just exhaustion. Animals who'd lived too hard learned to carry their weariness in silence. "Long day," Elias murmured, running a hand along Ash's neck. "It's over now." But it wasn't over. Not yet. Night tightened around the ranch like a clenched fist. The wind stopped altogether, leaving a hush so complete Elias could hear the faint drip of melting snow from the gutter. Willow Creek murmured in the distance, a soft, steady sound that usually soothed him. Tonight it felt like a countdown. He locked up the barn, checked every latch twice, then walked toward the house, boots crunching lightly on the frozen ground. Halfway there, he paused and looked back. Ash's silhouette moved inside the stall, shifting in the dim light. Elias exhaled, reassured for the moment, but sleep didn't come easily. He lay in bed, listening to the old house breathe, its timbers expanding and contracting with temperature, its windows rattling faintly, its pipes settling. Every sound felt sharper, more alert, more aware. Vivian Klein had changed the rhythm of the ranch simply by arriving. Sometime past midnight, Elias drifted into shallow sleep. But it shattered when a deep thump sounded from outside, soft, muted, but wrong enough to yank him awake instantly. He keyed up, heart pounding. For a long moment he listened. Nothing. Then it came again, a dull, heavy sound, like something falling. Elias threw on his coat and grabbed the flashlight, pushing out into the icy darkness. The cold hit him instantly, slicing through fabric and skin. The barn was quiet, no lights on except the dim night bulb above the door. The sky was thick with clouds, trapping what little moonlight there was. He reached the barn, unlatched the door, and stepped inside. "Ash?" he called softly. Silence. Then a rustle of straw, followed by a sound that struck him like a blow. A gasp. Horses don't gasp, not like that. This was sharp, human-like, the sound of a body losing its strength. Elias rushed to Ash's stall. The old horse was on his knees, forelegs trembling violently. His head drooped low, nostrils flaring as he struggled for air. His sides heaved with ragged effort, each breath shallow and panicked. "Easy, Ash, easy," Elias whispered, voice shaking as he fumbled with the latch. He knelt beside the horse the moment he entered the stall, pressing a hand against Ash's neck. The skin was cold. Too cold. A sheen of sweat soaked his coat despite the freezing air. Then Ash's hind legs buckled. He collapsed fully onto the straw, sides jerking, eyes wide with something beyond fear, like a distant memory clawing its way back. Elias's pulse roared in his ears. Instinct kicked in. He grabbed his phone and dialed June, pacing the stall with urgency. She answered on the second ring. "Elias? It's Ash. Something's wrong. He's down and I don't... Just get here, please. I'm on my way. Keep him warm. Don't move him if he's conscious." The line clicked dead, and Elias dropped to his knees again, pulling one of the heavy wool blankets from the stall rail. He draped it over Ash's body, hands trembling as he smoothed it over the trembling muscles. "It's okay," he whispered. "Stay with me, Ash. Just stay." Ash's breath rattled. His eyes darted rapidly beneath half-closed lids, chasing something invisible. Elias placed a hand on Ash's chest, trying to feel the rhythm of his heart, but the beats were erratic. A stuttering thump, followed by a long pause that made Elias's blood turn to ice. "Come on," Elias pleaded under his breath. "Not like this. Not here." A loud knock of hooves against the stall wall startled him. Ash jerked, legs kicking weakly. His entire body spasmed in one violent tremor. Elias held his neck gently, grounding him, whispering soft, steady words, even though he had no idea if the horse understood. The barn door swung open, letting in a gust of bitter air and June's hurried footsteps. "Move," she said, voice tight with urgency. Elias stepped back just enough to give her room. June knelt, stethoscope already in hand. She pressed it to Ash's chest, her brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. "What is it?" Elias asked, breath catching. June didn't answer immediately. She shifted the stethoscope, listening again. Then she pressed her palm lightly where the surgical scar curved beneath Ash's winter coat. Her lips parted in disbelief. "This isn't heart failure," she whispered. "This pattern, this rhythm, it shouldn't be possible." Ash gasped again, his body seizing once more before falling still except for the rapid flutter of his nostrils. June's eyes widened. "Elias!" His heart stopped, just for a second. "No!" Elias's voice broke. "Do something." "I'm trying." Ash's eyes glazed, then suddenly flared wide. His chest lurched. A sound rose from his throat, deep and primal, a groan torn from someplace buried under years of silence. His pulse fluttered violently beneath June's hand, then steadied, then fluttered again, a pattern struggling between life and collapse. June's expression shifted, fear, confusion, astonishment blending into something Elias had never seen on her face. "Elias, this isn't a failure. This is adaptation." "What does that mean?" he demanded. June swallowed hard. "It means his heart is trying to correct itself." Ash's chest convulsed once more, but instead of stuttering into stillness, the rhythm locked into place, strong, steady, young. A heartbeat that didn't belong to an old horse at all. June lifted her hand slowly, eyes shining with disbelief. "Elias, I think we just watched live tissue regeneration." Ash blinked, long and slow, then released a deep breath. Steady now, not ragged. His trembling eased. The fear drained from his eyes, replaced by a soft weariness. Elias sank to the straw beside him, exhaling shakily. June sat back on her heels, staring at Ash like she was staring at a miracle. "Whatever Dr. Hale did to him," she whispered, "it's still happening, right now, inside him." Elias looked down at Ash, brushing a hand over his muzzle. "You're not done fighting, are you?" he murmured. Ash closed his eyes, not from weakness, but from peace. The barn fell quiet again, but this silence wasn't threatening. It was reverent, a moment balanced on the edge of something extraordinary. The storm eased just before dawn, leaving the world wrapped in a muffled white hush. Snow draped over the barn roof and hung heavy on the branches of the aspens, bending them like tired sentinels keeping watch over the ranch. Elias hadn't slept. He'd spent the rest of the night in the barn, sitting on a turned-over feed bucket beside Ash's stall, listening to the slow, steady breaths of the horse who should not have survived the collapse, let alone recovered with the heartbeat of an animal half his age. Ash stood now, calm, chewing hay as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Elias couldn't shake the sight of the old horse lying in the straw, lifeless for a terrifying moment, only for his heart to jolt back to life with a vigor that defied reason. June had left around 4 in the morning, exhausted, but energized by something that clearly terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. They'd agreed to meet again later, but neither of them needed to say what they both knew. This wasn't normal. This wasn't natural. And if Vivian Klein, or whoever she worked for, had even the faintest idea of what Ash had done last night, they wouldn't stop until they got him back. By late morning, the sky had cleared enough that thinned sunlight broke through in pale streaks. Elias walked toward the house, boots crunching in the fresh snow, mind a tangle of questions he didn't know how to untie. At the porch he paused, staring at the mountains rising in the distance, massive, silent, ancient, solid. They made him feel small but somehow steadier. Inside, he brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the bitterness grounding him. As he sat at the kitchen table, the silence pressed in, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Miriam Hale. The research. The disappearance. Ash's impossible heart. Every thread pointed somewhere, but nowhere clear. His phone buzzed. Elias snatched it up, half expecting it to be June, or maybe Vivian with another unwelcome visit. Instead, it was an email notification. Sender: Dr. June Wallace. Subject line: Found something. You need to see this. Elias opened it, found archived materials related to Hale's private work. Unpublished logs stored at the university. Might explain the surgery. Pick you up in 20. 20 minutes later, June's green Subaru rolled into the driveway. She stepped out, clutching a folder thick with old printouts, her cheeks flushed from the cold and the kind of excitement scientists only got when the universe cracked open in front of them. Come inside, Elias said, nodding toward the door. June brushed snow from her coat and stepped into the kitchen. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she spread the papers across the table. Notes, diagrams, recorded observations. Some pages were yellowed with age. Others looked like photocopies of originals that had vanished long ago. I found these in an old cabinet in the research wing, she said. They never got filed when Miriam went missing, almost like someone didn't want them found. Elias frowned. What do they say? June tapped a diagram, an anatomical drawing of a horse's heart, lines drawn around the ventricles, notations scrawled in tight handwriting. This, she said, is where she tested regenerative graft material. Elias stared. Regenerative? Miriam believed heart tissue could be reprogrammed, stimulated to regrow. June scanned another page. She tested the theory on lab specimens for years, but only one subject survived the full surgical procedure. Elias swallowed. Ash. June nodded. She referred to him as Subject 7, the only success out of 7 attempts, the only one with a stable recovery. Elias felt something in his chest go tight. 6 others died? Not necessarily during surgery, June said carefully, but none reached sustained regeneration. Only Subject 7 did. She handed him another sheet. It was a journal entry dated nearly 6 years ago. Pulse strong. Tissue response exceeding predictions. Subject displays resilience beyond normal parameters. Must keep him hidden until Oversight Committee halts corporate interference. They want proof before ethics review, but proof would put him at risk. Elias's jaw clenched. Corporate interference. Miriam was scared of the people funding her. June nodded grimly. And with reason. She slid a final page toward him. It showed detailed notes about the incision, its shape, placement, depth. It was identical to the scar on Ash. I compared the scar pattern, she said softly. It matches exactly. Elias stared at the paper, at the meticulous drawings. What happened to her? Why did she disappear? We can't know, June replied, but she was hiding something. Hiding him. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. Elias, Ash isn't just a horse that survived a surgery. His body is still regenerating. What he did last night, his heart restarting like that, Miriam might have seen it happen once, maybe twice, enough to make her realize she'd done something the world wasn't ready for. The words settled over the room like falling snow, quiet, heavy, and hard to push away. Elias leaned back, hands on his face. "This is bigger than anything I wanted to be involved in." "I know," June said gently, "but you didn't choose it. Ash chose you." The phone buzzed again. This time a text message. "Unknown number. You're not safe. They know he's alive. Leave the ranch if you can." Elias's stomach dropped. His pulse hammered in his ears. "Who is it?" June asked, seeing his face pale. He handed her the phone. She scanned the message quickly, then looked at him with an expression that mixed urgency and fear. "This isn't good," she whispered. "Someone's trying to warn you." "Or someone's trying to scare me." June shook her head. "No, this feels like a warning. Someone on the inside, maybe. Someone who knows what Vivian is capable of." Elias stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. His boots thudded on the wood floor, each step harder than the last. "I can't leave Ash," he said. "Not with what happened last night. He's too vulnerable." "Elias, no." He turned to her. "Someone saved him once. Miriam did. If she gave her life for him." His voice wavered. He steadied it. "I'm not letting him fall into their hands now." June held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we protect him," she said. "But we need more than guesses. We need to know who's behind this." Elias returned to the table, scanning the last of Miriam's notes, the heartbreak in her handwriting almost palpable. "If anything happens to me, Subject 7 must remain hidden. His survival is proof of what is possible and of what must never be misused." Elias's hand tightened around the paper. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing loose snow across the windows, making faint patterns like writing on frosted glass. Elias felt the pressure of the moment, of choices narrowing, of dangers closing in. He folded the papers carefully and looked toward the barn. Ash was more than a miracle. He was evidence. He was a truth someone had killed to bury. And now the truth lived on Elias's ranch, breathing, healing, regenerating. And someone out there wanted him back. The first warning came from the wind. It swept down from the Tetons in sudden, vicious gusts, bending the aspens low and sending loose snow spiraling across the valley floor. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a heavy iron gray, the kind of sky that didn't just promise a storm, it guaranteed it. Elias stepped onto the porch, coat pulled tight, and scanned the horizon. Snow clouds stacked like mountains upon mountains, swallowing the last hint of sunlight. Inside the barn, Ash paced slowly in his stall, ears flicking with unease. The horse seemed to feel the approaching storm in his bones, and Elias couldn't blame him. Every instinct in the rancher's body told him the same thing. Something was coming. Not just the weather, something else. Something colder. June had left earlier with Miriam's notes, promising to run scans and cross-check data with colleagues she trusted. She'd hugged her coat tighter before getting in her Subaru, telling Elias to call her at the first sign of trouble. She must have sensed, done it too, that tension in the air, the kind that made the world feel wired and listening. Elias finished securing the barn windows and had just stepped back outside when headlights cut through the darkening snow. His blood went cold. The lights weren't the soft yellow of local ranch trucks or the scattered glow of passing travelers. These beams were sharp, modern, white-blue, and too bright. The black SUV rolled onto the property with practiced confidence. Not one this time. 3. They pulled up in a perfect triangle formation, engines humming in low, synchronized rhythm. The snowfall thickened, twisting around the vehicles like ghosts stirred awake. Elias stood still, breath a mist against the cold, every muscle ready but uncertain how to brace for what was about to unfold. The first SUV door opened, and Vivian Klein stepped out. Her black coat flowed in the wind like a flag of war, her blonde hair pinned immaculately in place despite the storm. Behind her, two men emerged, broad-shouldered, solid, unhurried. They weren't dressed like ranch hands or security guards. Their movements had the precision of people who had trained for the kind of jobs nobody openly talked about. Vivian approached with the calm of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. "Mr. Morgan," she called out, her voice carrying over the rising wind, "this visit is no longer a negotiation." Elias didn't move from the porch. "You're trespassing." Vivian's smile was faint, controlled, almost pitying. "Please, let's not pretend we have time for formalities." Her gaze drifted toward the barn, and something shifted in her expression, an intensity, a hunger, a calculation so precise it sent a chill racing through Elias's spine. "We know what happened last night," she said, "and we know what the horse did." The storm seemed to pause, as if listening. Elias tightened his jaw. "You don't know anything." Vivian tilted her head, her eyes narrowing in a way that made him feel stripped bare. "Don't insult my intelligence. We have monitoring channels everywhere. When a regenerative subject collapses and then stabilizes, it sets off certain alerts. You're not the only one watching him." Behind her, one of the large men tapped something in his coat, a signal, a check-in, a silent message. The storm muted the sound, but not the gesture. Elias took a step forward, boots sinking into fresh snow. "You need to leave." Vivian's eyes hardened. "You're in no position to make demands. The animal you're harboring is proprietary property. You are interfering with federally funded biomedical research." She paused. "That's a prosecutable offense." "He's not property," Elias shot back. "He's a living creature. He's been through hell, and you left him to die." Vivian's expression flickered, annoyance, then something like cold impatience. "I grow tired of this romanticization. That horse was engineered for scientific advancement, not companionship." The wind surged suddenly, whipping snow between them. Elias felt heat rising in his chest, anger mingled with fear, and something fiercely protective. "You're not taking him," he said. Vivian nodded at her men. The two moved toward the barn. Elias stepped off the porch and placed himself directly in their path, hands clenched at his sides. The shorter of the two, a giant of a man despite being the smaller one, paused only because the snow made the footing uneven, not because Elias intimidated him. "You want to move him?" Elias said, voice low. "You go through me first." Vivian gave a slow, disappointed sigh. "Mr. Morgan, I really hoped you would choose a quieter route." She signaled again. The world lurched. The two men spread out, flanking the barn. Snow blew in heavy sheets, nearly blinding Elias. He stumbled forward, trying to intercept them, but a sudden wall of wind slammed into him, forcing him to shield his eyes. For a moment he lost sight of everything, Vivian, the men, the barn. Then, a distant whinny, sharp, fearful. "Ash!" "No!" Elias shouted, pushing through the wind, legs burning from the effort. The barn loomed ahead, its shape blurred by the blizzard swirling into chaos. He forced the door open, stumbling inside. Ash was pacing, frantic, eyes wide with terror. His breath came in hard bursts, fogging the air. He'd heard the voices. He'd sensed them. "Easy," Elias whispered, throat raw. "Stay calm. We're getting you out." He grabbed the lead rope, but Ash didn't need coaxing. The horse stepped forward, pressing close like a frightened child seeking shelter. Elias wrapped the rope securely around his hand, heart pounding against his ribs. Outside, footsteps thudded, heavy, deliberate. "Come on, old boy," Elias whispered. "We can't stay here." He led Ash out the back door, into the storm. The wind hit them like a physical force, sharp and freezing. Snow lashed sideways, erasing the world beyond a few feet. Elias hunched his shoulders, shielding Ash as best he could, though the horse's bulk actually shielded him more. They moved toward the tree line, toward the small hunting cabin Elias rarely used, tucked behind a cluster of pines. Behind them he heard shouting. Vivian's voice, furious now, cutting clean through the wind. "Find them! Now!" Elias didn't look back. He tugged Ash forward, guiding him along the fence line, following it by touch when sight failed. The storm roared around them, smothering sound and swallowing footprints almost instantly. Ash pressed against Elias, trusting him without hesitation, the kind of trust that takes a lifetime to earn, yet had formed in days. They reached the cabin just as the storm hit full force. Elias shoved the door open, guiding Ash inside. The space was cramped but sheltered. He shut the door and threw the bolt, breathing hard, heart pounding. Outside, angry voices rose and fell. The storm masked everything, but through its howl he caught fragments, commands, frustration, threats thrown into the wind. Ash stood trembling, but alive. Elias placed his forehead against the horse's, eyes closed, breath shaking. "We're safe for now," he murmured. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. They had crossed a line tonight. There was no going back. Vivian Klein wasn't leaving empty-handed. And whatever she represented, whatever secret world Miriam Hale had died protecting, had finally arrived at his doorstep with storm clouds at their back. The storm raged long into the night, a roaring, blinding force that swallowed the valley whole. Snow slammed against the small hunting cabin, rattling the windows and piling high along the doorframe. Inside, Elias paced in the narrow space, listening to the wind beat against the walls as if it were trying to claw its way inside. Ash stood close, his breath warm in the freezing air, steam rising from his nostrils each time he exhaled. The horse's eyes remained alert, flicking toward every creak of the old wood, every tremor from the wind outside. Elias couldn't sit, couldn't calm himself enough to rest. Every muscle in his body hummed with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. Vivian Klein and her men were out there somewhere, watching the storm, waiting for it to break, calculating their next move. The storm might buy him time, but it also trapped him, isolated him even more than Vivian had intended. He checked his phone for the 7th time. No service, no messages. Only the battery icon slowly draining. He cursed under his breath and shoved it back in his pocket. Ash shifted, nudging Elias with the tip of his muzzle. The gesture was soft, grounding. Elias rested a hand on the horse's neck and exhaled long and slow. "You've got more faith in me than I deserve," he whispered. A sudden thud sounded against the cabin wall, the unmistakable crunch of boots on snow. Heavy, deliberate steps. Elias froze, breath catching. Ash stiffened instantly, head snapping toward the sound. Another step followed, then another, circling the cabin. They'd found them. Elias reached for the old hunting rifle mounted above the small fireplace, not to shoot, but to hold, to show he wouldn't let them take Ash without a fight. His palms were slick with sweat, despite the cold. "Stay quiet," he murmured to Ash. A shadow passed by the frost-covered window. Then a beam of light swept across the glass, a flashlight cutting through the storm like a scalpel. Voices murmured outside, barely audible over the wind. Elias strained to listen, but caught only fragments. "Can't see a damn thing. Tracks ended here. He has to be inside." Elias's heart slammed painfully in his chest. He moved silently toward the door, placing each step with the care of a man walking a tightrope over a canyon. When he was close enough, he pressed his back to the wall, beside the door, and held the rifle tight, breath shallow and controlled. Outside, footsteps drew closer. Then, Bang! A fist pounded the door, loud enough to make dust rain from the ceiling beams. "Mr. Morgan!" Vivian's voice sliced through the storm like a knife. "Open the door." Elias didn't move. "I know you can hear me," she continued. "This is pointless. You can't hide him forever. Come out, and we'll resolve this without escalation." Without escalation. Elias nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. Vivian's shadow shifted behind the window. "You have 5 seconds before we force entry." Elias tightened his grip. He steadied his breathing. He prayed, not for himself, but for time, for anything that could get them out of this. But time had already run out. A terrible cracking sound split the air. The doorframe groaned. Booted feet slammed against the wood again and again. Snow fell from the rafters with each impact. Elias braced, knowing he couldn't hold the door shut forever. Then, a new sound. Engines, multiple engines rumbling over the ridge like an avalanche of steel and horsepower. Vivian's men paused. Vivian herself stepped back from the door, her voice sharp with confusion. "What?" Red and blue lights cut through the whiteout, swirling like ghosts in the storm. The wind carried the unmistakable squawk of radios, law enforcement radios. Elias blinked in disbelief. The cavalry had arrived. Headlights burst through the snow, illuminating the clearing. Several vehicles slid to a stop. County sheriff trucks, unmarked SUVs, and at least one heavy-duty truck with reinforced bumpers. Doors flew open. Figures emerged, armed and moving with swift coordination. A booming voice shouted through the storm. "Sheriff's office! Step away from the cabin! Hands where we can see them!" Vivian's silhouette stiffened. Even through the howling wind, Elias sensed the moment she realized she'd been outmaneuvered. "Who contacted them?" one of her men hissed. Vivian didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because just then, through the swirling snow, another vehicle appeared. A familiar green Subaru skidded to a stop beside the sheriff's trucks. June climbed out, hair whipped wild by the wind, coat flapping. She had called them. She had saved them. One of the deputies advanced, shouting commands through a bullhorn. Vivian's men looked to her for direction. She lifted a hand, calm, composed. They lowered their weapons. They didn't surrender, but they paused, each waiting for Vivian's decision. "Mr. Morgan," a deputy yelled, "come out slowly, with your hands visible." Elias lowered the rifle, heart still hammering, and opened the cabin door. Snow blasted inward, swirling like a vortex. He stepped out with hands raised, blinking against the cold. June rushed toward him, slipping once in the snow before catching herself. "You okay?" she shouted. "I'm fine," Elias shouted back. "Ash is inside." Before June could respond, Vivian stepped into the clearing, hands lifted slightly, her coat whipping around her. Even surrounded by law enforcement, she held herself with the cold dignity of someone who believed she was still in control. "This is a misunderstanding," she called out. "We are conducting a lawful retrieval of research property." Sheriff Holloway, a large man with a salt and pepper beard, cut her off. "You broke onto private property during a blizzard, with armed personnel. That's not lawful anything." Vivian smiled thinly. "We have federal clearance." "Then you won't mind showing it," Holloway shot back. Her smile faltered. More officers stepped in. Radios crackled. Men moved with purpose, cuffing Vivian's men, searching the SUVs, documenting everything. Vivian remained still, like a chess piece waiting for the board to shift in her favor. Snow stung Elias's face as he watched, still dazed from the sudden reversal. June grabbed his arm, grounding him. "I told the sheriff everything," she said breathlessly. "About Miriam, the research, the warning you got, all of it." Elias stared at her. "They believed you?" June nodded. "Enough to come running." Behind them, Vivian was being confronted by two deputies. She didn't resist, but she didn't look defeated either. Her gaze drifted, slowly, deliberately, toward the cabin door. Toward Ash. Elias stepped in front of her line of sight. "You're done," he said quietly. Vivian's eyes glinted through the storm, cold and calculating. "This isn't over, Mr. Morgan." Before he could reply, the deputies moved in and took her by the arms, guiding her toward a waiting vehicle. Officers continued rounding up her team, their silhouettes hazy in the swirling snow. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, letting the wind rush past him, letting the storm wash over the fear that had been building for days. He felt June's hand steady on his arm. When he opened his eyes again, the path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time he wasn't facing it alone. Inside the cabin, Ash let out a soft whinny. Alive. Safe. For now. The storm passed with the quiet dignity of something ancient completing its duty. By morning, the valley lay beneath a smooth, untouched sheet of white, glittering under the rising sun. Willow Creek whispered beneath a thin crust of ice, and the mountains stood sentinel above it all. Calm, unwavering, as if the world hadn't nearly torn itself apart the night before. Elias stood outside the hunting cabin, breath rising in steady puffs, hands braced on his knees as he watched deputies pack up their vehicles. Tracks carved deep paths through the snow, rows of boot prints, tire ruts, the scars left behind by conflict. Vivian and her men had been escorted into custody before dawn, their SUVs impounded, their weapons seized. The sheriff's office had promised to contact federal authorities that actually follow the law, as Sheriff Holloway had put it with a grim scowl. Now the frenzy had softened. Officers mapped the scene, murmuring into radios. The storm had erased everything but its own violence. Inside the cabin, Ash stood quietly, head lowered, ears flicking at every sound. But he wasn't afraid now, just watchful. Elias stepped toward him, placing a hand against the warm curve of Ash's neck. "It's over," he whispered. "At least, this part." Ash leaned into him gently, their breath mixing in the chill. Elias had known horses his whole life, but no animal had ever felt quite like this one. So fragile, so powerful, so impossibly alive. When June arrived, snow dusted her shoulders and hair. She entered the cabin slowly, almost reverently, her eyes scanning Ash from hoof to withers, as if confirming with her own eyes that the miraculous heartbeat she'd heard the night before truly belonged to the creature standing before her now. "He looks stronger," she said softly. "He does." Elias smoothed Ash's mane. He rested. June approached, placing her stethoscope gently against Ash's chest. She closed her eyes, listening. A slow smile crept onto her face, small, stunned, disbelieving. "It's stable," she murmured. "Elias, whatever regenerated last night, it's holding. His heartbeat is like a horse 10 years younger." Elias swallowed, relief mixed with awe. "Then he's going to be okay?" June nodded. "Better than okay. He's thriving." The weight lifted from Elias's chest, weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. But the relief was quickly tempered by something else. Uncertainty, a tug inside him that said this miracle wasn't his to keep locked away from the world. The sheriff stepped into the cabin, hat tucked under one arm. "Morgan," he said, "I need to talk to you." Elias nodded and followed him outside. The air bit at his skin, but he barely felt it. "We've run the IDs on those folks from last night," Holloway said. "They're tied to a private biomedical outfit headquartered in Texas. The feds are stepping in, proper ones this time." "Are they coming after him again?" Elias asked, voice low. "Not if we can help it." Holloway's gaze softened. "You did everything right. You protected an animal in danger, and you cooperated with law enforcement. Nobody's taking him from you without a legal war. And trust me, there's eyes on this case now." Elias exhaled slowly. Good. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Laws weren't walls. They were guidelines. And people like Vivian operated in shadows between those guidelines, slipping through cracks that the rest of the world didn't know existed. He returned to the cabin and found June brushing snow from her gloves. Her eyes met his, full of the same unspoken understanding. "They'll come back, won't they?" he asked quietly. "Maybe not her," June said. "But people with the kind of resources she works for. They don't just walk away from something like Ash." Elias looked at the horse standing near the window, sunlight catching the soft gray of his coat. Ash turned his head slightly, as if listening, as if sensing the gravity in their voices. "He deserves better than this," Elias said. "Better than hiding, better than being hunted." June stepped closer. "Elias, there's something else." She reached into her bag and pulled out a letter, a worn, yellowed envelope sealed long ago. The university archivist found this tucked inside Miriam's personal box. It was addressed to whoever ended up with Subject 7, if he survived. Elias's heart lurched. He took the envelope gently, almost afraid it might crumble, in his hands. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was elegant, rushed but deliberate. "If you're reading this, it means he lived. It means the world still holds the miracle I gave everything for. Please protect him. Not because he is an experiment, but because he is the proof that we can heal what has been broken, not for profit, not for power, for hope. Whatever they tell you he is more than that, more than they could ever understand, more than even I did. Miriam Hale." A single line at the bottom struck Elias like a fist to the chest. Take him somewhere he can be a horse, not a secret. He folded the letter carefully, breath trembling. "I think I know what we have to do," he said. June nodded. "Get him home." Together they led Ash out into the clearing. The storm clouds had broken completely now, revealing a sky washed in shades of gold and pale blue. Sunlight danced on the new snow, throwing shards of light across the valley. Ash lifted his head, nostrils flaring as he tasted the crisp air. Elias ran a hand gently down the horse's neck. "You ready?" he asked. Ash nudged his shoulder in answer. They walked slowly through the trees toward the open pasture, the same pasture Ash had looked toward on his first night at the ranch, the one place where he had seemed to relax, to breathe freely. As they reached the fence line, Elias unlatched the gate and stepped back. Ash paused, not out of fear, but out of understanding. He looked at Elias, then at June, then at the expanse of snow-covered freedom stretching before him. He stepped forward, one hoof, then another, and then he broke into a trot, slow at first, then smoother, then lighter, as if shedding years with each stride. Elias watched with a swelling in his chest he couldn't describe. Ash's movements were fluid, powerful, each step a testament to a body reborn. Finally, the old horse stretched into a gentle canter, the wind lifting his mane, the snow scattering beneath his hooves like sparks. June placed a hand on Elias's arm. "He's beautiful." "He's free," Elias whispered. Ash circled once across the pasture, breath puffing in soft clouds, tail streaming behind him. Then he chewed, turning back toward Elias with a calm, steady gaze, one that held gratitude, trust, and something deeper, something wordless and ancient. Elias felt peace settle into him, warm and quiet, like sunlight after a long winter. He had saved Ash, but Ash had saved him too. Later, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, turning the snow to gold, Elias leaned on the fence and whispered sadness to the wind, "This is your home now, as long as you want it." Ash stood beneath the fading light, peaceful and unafraid. The miracle lived on. And for the first time in a long time, Elias felt the same. If this story touched you the way it touched me, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Tell me what part stayed with you most. And if you'd like to join me for more heartfelt stories about people, animals, and the quiet miracles in this world, feel free to subscribe. I'd be honored to have you with us for the next journey.